Welcome, everyone.
Thank you very much. Well, hello, everybody. I'm going to introduce myself in a second, but I drove my wife to the airport today and she said, Richard, how long do you take talking about yourself in the beginning? She said 15 or 20 minutes. And I said, what are you kidding? And she goes, does anybody else get to tell me about themselves? And honestly, it's a challenge in a class like this. So I thought I'd vaudeer you all and say, how many have relatives in police work? 3, 4. How many have been in police work? Corrections, criminal justice system. How many lawyers? How many people went to law school? See, that's an interrogation question. Oh, someone raised their hand? Okay. I won't belabor this one. I have a bad habit. I tend to prepare when I come into the class for the first time. I have so much material to cover that it's impossible to cover it in the hour and 40 minutes that we have here. And so I'll get up to speed. Bear with me in the first class. As we move along and I get a sense of what interests you all, count on me being willing to change the schedule of classes and the subjects that we've set up and go into things that you want to talk about. The flow goes better. That's the best I can say. And I have to say that I'm delighted to teach this class again because online was a complete nightmare. I want you to imagine when they say online courses at universities and here at USF, they're usually packaged products that have discussion points and assignments for the students, and you have a blog and a number of things that you do to teach in an online format. What we had was a camera, and I had to talk for an hour and 40 minutes every week, and I couldn't see anybody, and they couldn't say anything to me. That was I don't know how they made it through that. Anyway, so let me tell you a little bit about myself, just so you believe me, the things that I say. First of all, I feel a little awkward putting a picture of myself up there. I honestly have really thought about taking it off because I just put it up yesterday. But I so enjoyed police work, and this to me captures San Francisco. That's Lucille from the Giants, and I'm standing right by home plate, which I got to do once in my life. So it's very exciting to me. Anyway, I finished number 3 in the department. Mike Lascavio is one of my teachers in the MBA program at Golden Gate. I went to the command college, which is sort of and not that I'm a baseball fanatic, but it's kind of the top of the 7th inning career-wise leadership program for a couple of years. And it was sort of career changing for me. I ran an institute up here for a while that sort of was wiped out at the time of the pandemic. We would gather 300 officers, we're lieutenants, captains, and chiefs once a year. Nobody's doing in-person meetings like that anymore. And so could come back in some other form. One of the more interesting things I've done since retiring in the last 5 years, I've been a long-term care ombudsman. So I get to be, a lot of my life has been involved in conflict, right? Police work, law, and I found myself being able to advocate for people who, have rights to certain things in assisted living, and another life-changing experience for me. And then right now I do what's called a police practices. I'm a qualified police practices expert. So when there's litigation, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the dumbest way to solve society's problems, because all it does is spend a ton of money. I take, maybe in the last year, I've done 4 cases, which is about all I want to do, where I go in and I look at what happened. Let's say there was a shooting at a facility, or an officer did something, or somebody owns property and someone was hurt. And I come in and look at it and say, what are the public safety issues? But here's what I really want to show you is that's me, that. That's my youngest son, Jack. He's 22 and he's a first-year law student at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. That's my son, Bob, he's a project manager, and that's baby Bobby. He's 15 months old. So he's a sixth generation San Franciscan, tip of the arrow. And they live in the Richmond district, and Junior's on, down south. He says he's never coming back. Okay, so here's what I want to do in this class. And this is the busiest slide you're going to see. And just there's too much up there, right? You might read it, but I'm going to synopsize it. Is that I want you all to understand how we came to be the policing world that we are today. And we're going to start in the 10th century, okay, 11th century. But we're actually going to move through those early years rather quickly. I want you to understand use of force, sanctioned use of force by the government. I want you to leave here at the end of this class understanding how those things are evaluated, what are the policies, the relationships between use of force and public support and trust. I want to help you. All of this is when we finish this class to look at the issues that you see on television, that you read and understand, and maybe even weigh in about what would be a better practice and why. Because a lot of police work, a lot of police departments are rather insular, so it's hard for most folks to understand the why of things. We'll talk about justice, procedural justice, and how that informs department policies. I'm saying like a lot. People are watching. So the importance of legitimacy and trust, that sounds complicated, but basically legitimacy is that we trust that government will act within the rules that we want them to act within. And to the extent we don't believe that that's happening, when I say government, I mean from the police officer on the street to the mayor, we have expectations and guidelines. And if they are not following those, we don't view them as legitimate, and then it raises trust questions. And I want to lay that out. I can't even say the word. It's like an algorithm. Police culture is really very interesting to me. There's a lot. We'll have fun talking about that. We'll talk about assimilation, what it's like to be a recruit, getting out of the, signing up and going through the process and getting in the academy, and that assimilation process, converting that recruit into a police officer who can operate in the culture of a particular department. And so I guess about how we got here is what I want us to leave with. Let me tell you one thing I think is important. I was teaching a course in ethics in a graduate school at USF some years ago. And I had a existential moment of how could I stand in front of these young students and ask them to use ideas and formulas and things to make ethical decisions, when in my early career, I witnessed and therefore I think tacitly approved of practices that were wholly unacceptable. The violation of people's rights, the leadership, and it, I could overplay it. Was it criminal? No. But I just thought things could be a lot better. And I was afraid that I was going to become more like that culture than who I was and what my values were. I was young. So I went to a family friend who was high up in the police department, and I said, listen, I want to go to school, but I'm at a very busy station. Do you think you could help me get to a quiet station where I could go to school? And he said, yes, I can do that for you. And he said that this will explain my education. He said, yes, I'm going to transfer you. But the moment you're not in school anymore, you're going back. I said, okay. So I spent the next 7.5 years in school. And I love police work. I love helping people. I think it's noble, a noble calling. So that's, I think, why I'm standing up here today. That's me. Any questions? So we're going to back up to where did policing come from? Because at one point there wasn't any. And for most of, sort of the last 900 years, it was just sort of people watching out for themselves and maybe their neighbors. But there wasn't really any organized policing. And we're gonna use basically England and London because that's where modern policing in the United States comes from. And if this seems boring, it'll get very interesting. I got a few movies for you, and that'll bring it to what I think are very contemporary issues. Anyway, they were before the 1700s. People were more rural. They were more agrarian. They didn't really need a police force. Didn't know what a police force was. But at some point in London in late 16, early 1700s, a lot of it driven by economics, about poverty, about civil unrest, unemployment, inflation. They started to have social problems. And with that was the growth of criminal activity, theft. And so they came up with a couple of ideas. So we have self-policing. The Pool of London was a very early, uh, uh, oh, I didn't put one up there. Well, I'll deal with the Frank Pledge system first. They decided that you needed to have a little organization about watching over neighborhoods and communities. So in groups of 10, men who lived in a particular community would group in groups of 10, and that 10 would group in groups of 100. So 10 groups of 10, and they'd have someone called a sheriff who was in charge of them. And essentially, they were responsible community members that didn't get any pay and kind of kept an eye on things. And I guess if there was trouble, they'd go and help out as best they could. I suspect that they did a lot of drinking and eating and hanging out and doing nothing, which took a few years to figure out. Then so the sheriff, you get where we get to sheriff today. This started in the 11th century. This idea of grouping people together to watch over a community. When I was a station captain, I liked coming in the middle of the night and saying hello to the officers. And one night I said, "Hey," and they're all sitting around because there's a lot of downtime in the middle of the night in police work, but they're all sitting around talking. And I didn't come into bed check. I came in because I lived in the city and a lot of the captains didn't, so they couldn't just come in, but I could just drop in. So anyway, I said, "Who's keeping this neighborhood safe?" There were 96,000 people in the Richmond. I said, "Who's keeping them safe?" "We are," he said, with the officers. "We are. Look at us. We go when they call. We're keeping them safe." And the truth is that people are keeping themselves safe to this day. That the order and everything in neighborhoods, the watching out, the vigilance that they do, they call the police when things have gotten to a point where you can't take care of it yourself anymore, or something that's scary. But anyway, I have a fond memory of that conversation because they really thought while they were all sitting around in the assembly room in the middle of the night talking about transmissions and vacations that they were keeping 96,000 people safe. Anyway, the Bow Street Runners. This is kind of interesting. Anybody ever heard of the Bow Street Runners before? I'm going to say 1790s. So what they did was an address on Bow Street was where the local court was, and there was a magistrate. So they got a group of guys together and paid them to go serve warrants and to collect past due taxes and occasionally go arrest somebody. And they were paid piecemeal for their work. So there was no patrol, no formal structure, no administrative structure, and very little government involvement. Imagine all of you today, me saying that here's 100 warrants, divvy them up and see if you can catch the person, and you get $50 if you can come back with them. That was the system of public safety in the early 1700s in London. The Pool of London has to do with private security came up even before policing. They had big court in on the Thames somewhere, and realized that the amount of theft and losses was off the hook. So they did some private security where people were paid to patrol and deter by just being there. Okay, now my favorite guy, the Metropolitan Police Act. Anybody ever heard of Robert Peel or Peelian Principles? Okay, we'll get to the Peelian Principles later, but let me just say that he was the Home Secretary in 1829 and recognized that they needed to professionalize policing. Wanted to establish and did establish the Metropolitan Police Department, and he had some ideas that really equated to the public had to trust the police, and if they didn't, that it would be ridiculous. It would be a government function that was more like the Bow Street Runners, where if you were connected or you had money or bribes or alcohol, that you could reduce the effectiveness of your security force. But anyway, so they developed this thing with to have police officers, and the public opposition was that the bobbies, as they called them, or peelers, would be like another branch of the military, and the public was uncomfortable with that. So he came up with some ideas, including they had to be in uniform, they had to be 100% under government control, they had to have badges with numbers on them. Why do you think they needed numbers on them? That's right. We have that today, right? What's your badge number? 1829, that was one of the ways to build trust in the police force that was supposed to be protecting the city. He also felt it was important that I want to get to the most important thing first, numbers, that they be trained. And he wanted even-tempered and reserved men. That would be an important thing today, right? Not men, but even-tempered and reserved. I don't know how that translates into modern language, but that was important at the time. And then for the first time, they decided in the Metropolitan Police Act that these folks would have to be trained. You wouldn't give them a whistle and a club and say, off you go. And also that they wouldn't be armed. They didn't think that guns were necessary to deal with the issues they were dealing with, which was a lot of social unrest and to bring order. I commented on legitimacy already. So what does the Metropolitan Police Act of 1829 have to do with us today? Most departments in this country still follow the basic principles that are here. And when we go through the Peelian principles in a later class, you'll see that the structure of departments, we took their model, we fouled it up a little bit because we got guns involved in it, right? There was a controversy at one time in this country whether officers should be armed or not. But so we've changed a few things, but largely modern policing is based on the Metropolitan Police Act of 1829. Any questions about this? So what would be next? Do I have a slide? Yeah. So this is my worst slide. So it's colonial times in the United States. So, and also in my history, if you're looking for a perfect fit between, one date and the next date, you won't get it. This is sort of my view of how we evolved. And we're going to get to where we are today in a little bit and how that happened. But in colonial times, they had there were constables who tended to be sort of weights and measures people and sort of the government guy on foot that would be in the neighborhoods. And without any particular crime fighting function, more sort of bringing order to things and not very well organized. And they also had a system where a watch system where you had volunteers that roamed around during the day to act as police. I use the word police. They didn't. They called it the watchman. And the watchman during the daytime, that was a great one. Uh, I don't think it did anything, and I think the literature suggests that it wasn't very helpful. Even worse was the night watch when they started that, because it turned into folks. And if I sound like I'm critical of law enforcement, I'm not. I am. I take an intellectual look at it, and I want to bring you to how we got to where we are today, and then we'll kind of jump in and say, is this right or is this wrong? Was the clip that showed up on CNN this morning with the jailer choking the guy in the elevator? How does that make you feel? You know, and how did that happen? And it's a product of this evolution. Anyway, where was I? I digressed. So the night watch didn't work well because they would be in pubs and eating and visiting friends and things like that, and then sleeping a lot. Here's an anecdote. I want to give you an anecdote every so often. I was night captain for some years, which was 7 at night till 4 in the morning, which is a terrible shift for a person in their, late mid 50s, I guess I was, early 50s. And the older captains that came before me, going back a long time, said, "Oh, just go home. Go home, read a book, take a nap. They'll call you when there's an incident in town and you can go." And that wasn't my nature coming up. So I didn't do it. I was cruising around town and I'd go to stations and, we'd go to the calls, the more serious ones, the shootings, the murders, that sort of stuff. And serious incidents where it helped to have a command level person there to pull resources out of bed, to the off-duty people, inspectors, and that sort of stuff. Anyway, but I did go home once. And I was sitting in my living room and it's 1:30 in the morning and I live in the city and the folks downtown, got home about 1 a.m. and the folks downtown knew where I was. I had a pager and a radio and everything else. And I sat down and I opened a book. And at about 1:45, I got a call to go to about as far out in the Bayview as you can get. So from 42nd and Anza to the Bayview took me at least 45 minutes to get there. And so I never went home again on the shift. I stayed usually in the middle of the city so I could go in any direction. But that was, let's see, 2000, when was I promoted? Maybe 2003, something like that, 2, 3. Yeah, yeah. They had a job then. They probably still have it, night supervising captain. So you have the whole city, which was, I don't know, the hours were terrible. And I was fairly newly married. So my wife would do things like wake me up at 9 o'clock in the morning and ask me, should she move the car out of the street cleaning thing? Or, then you're wide awake after being up all night. Anyway, the watch system, there were, regional differences. People took these jobs to evade military service or took these roles. And it was probably not a bad club to be part of in terms of your stature in the community. You're a watchman. That's a big deal. But still, we don't have organized police forces. Well, I'm going to say, let me give you a date to work off of here. I'm going to say that by 1830, in this, as we became less agrarian, and the United States came to be bigger cities, not little colonies anymore. We were large cities. So by the 1830s, policing came into being. And this was a government function. They hired people. By 1938, you had Boston, 1838, Boston, 1845, Albany, New York, Chicago in 1851. And the difference was now in formalizing this is that you had the government control, and they operated under a system of laws. that controlled, what policing was. You also had local control. So we've never had, really a state police that polices your area. There might be a little overlap, but each city had their police department. It wasn't a national police force or a state police force that provided those services, even though we have highway patrol and we can get into that. But so you had local control, yet over time, we've also seen the overlay of the highway patrol, the FBI, multiple agencies that deal with public safety. And to this day, that vexes and challenges us how to coordinate that. But communities are still very intent on hanging on to their police departments for their community. Anybody familiar with, I think it's Broadmoor? Is that little hamlet by Daly City? Yeah, they have 4 police officers there. Yeah, 4 police officers. And I don't know quite what they do, but that community insists on keeping their police department. So there was resistance here in the development of these police departments. The people that wanted to be police officers wanted to carry guns because we didn't really have a crime problem per se. We had social problems in this country dealing with economics, and mercantilism drove a lot of local government policy. So you had, people living on low wages in dangerous working conditions. You had early strikes. They called them riots then. But so the police were tasked with those more so than, actual crime fighting or general public safety or investigation as we, maybe think of them today. And so the people who went into this line of work did not want to wear uniforms. They felt that it would diminish their standing in the community. I'm not quite sure where that comes from. I had a great aunt once that we had a firefighter in the family, and she didn't want him wearing his uniform to come to visit. And she was alive in the late 1800s. So maybe there's something about a uniform that I don't understand, that people didn't want to wear uniforms. And the other thing is they wanted guns. They felt that the level of violence in the United States, the unrest, was much more dangerous than our across the pond friends who started policing, basically 100 years earlier. The uniform question and the gun question are long since resolved. They carry guns in this country and they wear uniforms, and a lot of the other Helian things, badge numbers and that sort of stuff. So I want to make one remark on slave patrols. There's some literature out there that suggests actually before the cities I mentioned, the first thing akin to organized policing in the United States were slave patrols in the 1700s, who were organized and paid, and all the way up until the Civil War, and until during the Civil War, that would capture runaway slaves, enforce, and after the Civil War, enforce Jim Crow laws and other things to differ. The Jim Crow laws were the main thing. And the second thing was runaway slaves, and they were also very heavy-handed as a way to assert dominance over this slave class of folks. So here you have organized people with some level of authority to use violence to intimidate people and to bring about compliance, and then they were enforcing laws. And some of those early agencies may have morphed into the early police departments in the post-Civil War South. So, sometimes it comes up where people say, well, the first ones were slave patrols. And I think there's literature to say that happened, but in the northern areas of the country, there were regular police departments evolving at the same time. But I like to mention this one about the South. I was sort of interesting.
Did the slave patrols become the Ku Klux Klan? Is that the theology of them all?
I don't know. It would seem to me it's probably a crossover, but what I know is that they were organized and funded and managed, and their role was to, basically go capture runaway slaves. And if you think about it, 50 years earlier, folks were taking care of their problems themselves. There wasn't an organized group, there's an interesting, before this time, you had thief takers. And if someone stole your property, you could hire someone to go get it back for you or get the person. So now you call the police, right? Back then you'd call the thief taker, and if you got the property, he would bring it back to you and you'd give him money. Yeah.
Yeah, the public in general, were guns readily available? Was it just automatically assumed that everybody had a gun?
I'm going to say we have such a long and deep history with guns that there were a lot of guns. Gun manufacturers were popping up all over the place. If you figure by the early 1800s, I'm sure. So I suspect that played into it, that we had more guns here, and with social unrest being the issue and riots and I always find it interesting, the mercantilism part of it, that you had actually businesses driving the politicians to create a police department to keep their employees in check and going in and working. How far can I go? Should we put a mark on the ground?
You can go to there.
Thank you. This is Herbert. He makes it all happen. How are we doing? So now, yeah.
Question, during the gold rush, and the police were starting here, what was the situation? Because of the gold rush, all it entailed.
We're going to get to that. So you figure 1849, we didn't have a police department then. We had constables. But let me get to that, because that's an important part of today's discussion. Is what about San Francisco? How did we evolve? And so, but now we're switching to the modern era. So let's come to, departments are from the 1830s forward are growing. They're starting to become organized. And these are the touchstones. I printed out my, this is really bad, but I print out my slides so I can read them, except I can't read them anymore. They're too small. And I almost came today without my glasses. I got 4 blocks from home. Could you imagine? I would just ask you to forgive me and we would dismiss the class if I didn't have my glasses. But so the modern era, public money and a bureaucracy that watches over the police department. Okay. Full-time employees, no more, 10 guys watching over things, no watch. But you know what, today we have watches in police departments. Do you ever wonder why you have a day watch, swing watch, and midnight watch? I worked all the watches in my career. Where did that language come from? Pre-modern era, going back 200 years. The traditions don't leave very quickly, and that'll relate to our discussions on culture. They weren't getting fees for going and capturing people. Although when I first started, they still had draft dodgers from the Vietnam era who had warrants in the system. And police officers in San Francisco could make $25 if one of these warrants popped up in the computer when they were talking to someone, if they drove them over to Treasure Island and delivered them. And I went once with the senior person who said, oh, I've got a draft dodger. And I guess in the early 70s it was a bigger deal, but by 1980, I guess there were still a few warrants, so they got $25. I went over once, so I know it's real. It wasn't some, legend within the department. Rules, procedures, and government authority. I hate reading slides to y'all, but this is, the important part is that we're making a shift now to sort of police departments as structured as we know them today. There's a little bit of oversight. There's a lieutenant, there's a captain. I can tell you that when I came in the police department in 1980, we had only stopped drinking on duty 2 years earlier. And I say we, that's true. There was Charles Gain came and he did what was called permanent order number 1. It was the first time that drunk on duty could be a firing offense. Well, the culture was drinking for 300 years, and I guess, there's no place for it in the work. I can tell you that. I don't know how they did it, but that changed the drinking culture in San Francisco. It essentially stopped at that point. I never saw anybody in my career drunk on duty. Shortly out of the academy, a lieutenant invited us a bunch to a spaghetti dinner, and he pulled out a big jug of wine, and none of us drank any of it. But he was from a different time. Anyway, so now we're in the modern era, and in this modern era, we have several policing, I'm going to call them eras, paradigms, whatever word is most comfortable, but certain ways we did policing that have changed. So, when everybody talks about reform today, got to reform law enforcement. It's been reformed at least since, I'm going to say, let me get this right, since about 1920, it's been reformed 4 times. Completely changing the way that police departments do business, their focus, how they operate. And it's interesting, we're in a time now where we're going through another change. I just can't figure out where it's going to end up, what's driving it. And so as we go into the modern era, let's start with the political era. This is my favorite one. Let's see if I have a slide for the political era. So these are the 4 paradigms, or 4, let's call them eras. Political era ended well, they tried to end it starting in about 1937, and it kind of wound down by 1960. Well, 1955. Then we get to the professional model, and I'm going to tell you what these things are because you've lived through the professional, we've lived through the professional model, the community policing model, and the Homeland Defense era. And we've watched it on television. We see it today. The political era is the most interesting to me. And it's the most home, to what was San Francisco doing? You're going to love these stories. I posted an article online that I want you to take a look at, but okay. I hope you find this as fun as I do. So let's go to the Civil War and forward, and now let's come to the West Coast. So we're in about 1900. Police officers were hired. There was a government structure, there was administrative oversight, but there was very little training, very little standards, no background investigations. And the main way that you became a police officer was through your local politician. And police officers during the political political era, they provided a whole lot of services. They were the almsmen. They found poor people and saw that they got money if they needed that or a home. They were the truant officers. They were the bill collectors for the tax department. They were the social workers. They were embedded in their communities that they worked in. And without a lot of centralized organization like managing what they're doing, I can tell you that the practices, the supervision of the time was there might be a sergeant. And the period we're talking about here, I want to focus on, it's from, let's just say, 1900 to 1940. So you get to about 1920, and the beat man, and I picked these words because they were all men. I'm a big fan of saying police officers because they're men and women in police work today, but then there weren't. So the beat man would head out to go about helping people in the neighborhood. And once an hour, the sergeant might crack a baton on the ground as he walked around, and he'd get a crack back to know that the person was on post. Or they'd blow a whistle and hear the whistle coming from some other place to know that, oh, your subordinate is there doing his job. That was basically police supervision of the time. But they were selected largely by the politicians, and their work was keeping the community happy, so they would vote for the politicians that were in office. And it wasn't just, oh, this is the way it works out. It was by design. You had to deliver the votes. You had to, as a police, had to deliver the votes, deliver the support. And at the same time, the politicians of the time were heavily involved in corruption. It was a corrupt period. There's lots of corrupt periods. We might even have one today. But the politicians were involved in prostitution and gambling and other forms of vice. So here they are controlling and picking the police departments. I think Cincinnati went through 8 police chiefs in a 4-year period. Let's see. Between 1878 and 1896, 7 chiefs. Los Angeles, their heads changed 13 times. The chief changed 13 times between 1879 and 1889. So somebody wasn't delivering on their duties to the local politicians. And if you look today, police agencies are heavily involved in politics. And that's a vestigial tale of this time. I've always wondered, where are the plumbers, where are the firefighters? The battles seem to be between the police and the politicians, or the support. The police department spend a lot of money getting people elected. I don't want to let this one go yet because you'll find this interesting. If you wanted to be promoted in New York City, a New York City sergeant's job would run you $1,600 at those times. That's what you'd pay the politicians to get promoted. If you wanted to be a captain, it was $15,000. There's still a Department General Order in San Francisco that it's a violation of the rules to pay someone to retire, because and I never saw it done. I did ask a retired commander once. I said, "Does that ever happen?" He goes, "The only question is how much." Because if somebody retires and they're occupying a spot in a higher rank, the next person on the list gets the job. And the lists have lifespans. So if it's 2 weeks before the list expires, there was a time where you would pay the person to retire. That's a modern look at that's this continuation of this system. And so they were very closely entwined here. So we get to people recognizing that there's a lot of corruption out there. And well, they decide to do something about it. And so here you have these police officers, in addition to doing the bidding of the politicians, providing a lot of services that now are handled by other parts of government. If you have health issues, folks that don't have a lot of money end up in that whole public health system. The police were the face of government in the communities. They solved domestic violence problems by someone saying, Harry is beating up his wife twice a week. And the police officer would go over there and tell Harry to knock it off. I'll be back, things like that. So you get it where they're working with their communities. The trouble was the corruption. So they decide, after a couple of sort of high-profile studies, that this all needs to change. San Francisco in 1937, and I've posted this edition of the Historical Society's Argonaut. I'm going to get in trouble if I keep walking out of the picture. The Historical Society's Argonaut on the site that you all have access to, and it's the rise and fall of San Francisco's last boss. But in talking about local corruption in San Francisco, in this era, in the patronage era, the political era, they delve into a report called the Atherton Report from 1937. Atherton was a former FBI person that they hired to investigate the San Francisco Police Department. It's about a 30-page report, which I've read. A reporter gave it to me years ago. It is the best read. I'm going to put it up there for you because wherever we are today, you can see we're not too long ago, we were very similar to where we are today. Maybe different sorts of corruption. Maybe it's the building department now. Maybe it's, politicians getting free rides on airplanes. I don't know. But in 1837, they hire this guy. And the Atherton report is most remarkable because it was delivered to the Superior Court judges that ordered it, and it disappeared immediately. They couldn't find it. So they had to go make a new one. And I guess that then the library got that copy. But I just want to read you a couple of excerpts from it. The San Francisco Police Department has a long and complex history of corruption that dates back to the city's mid-19th century birth. Kevin Mullins said at the time, one of the key factors that contributed to police corruption in San Francisco was those close relationships between the police department and the city's political machine. By 1930, corruption and graft had become deeply embedded within the San Francisco Police Department, and the department was widely viewed as one of the most corrupt law enforcement agencies in the country. The Atherton report documented numerous instances of police officers engaging in criminal activities such as bribery, extortion, protection rackets. I particularly like this one because I worked at Central Station for a couple of years. The report enumerated corruption, vice, and revealed approximately 135 regular and established houses of prostitution in San Francisco. In the Central District, there were 76, and there were actually 14 within a 2-block radius of the Hall of Justice. And if I sound like I'm being hard on the San Francisco Police Department, there were by 1837, the Hoover administration had established and set up this thing called the Wickersham Commission that was looking at these issues that were epidemic across the country, coming from this era of policing we were in and the way that we did business. The thing that in reading the report, so it's in here, the article, you should take a look at it. You see the connection between policing and politicians. And this just came out, so it's timely. This topic gives and gives. But in the larger Atherton report, the police commissioner, and I guess there was one at the time, was also a physician. And in his practice as a physician, it was his job to examine the prostitutes that were arrested and to decide whether they could go back in, out on their own, or whether they had to go to a sanitarium of the time to, become healthy. I don't know another way to say that. I'm trying to be polite about it. But here you have the whole system. We'd never stand for this today, I think. Anyway, they decide we got to do away with this system. Right? Does it make sense that you want to do away with this corrupt system? And so, what are you going to do? Corruption?
Around City Hall.
I
know the Mitchell brothers were there forever and they had a lot of people.
What do you know what I think? I think I think that San Francisco generally likes a little bit of corruption. With just enough to get your building permit approved, just enough to, get your tree trimmed because you know someone. But we have a line, and the line is probably a fair one, except so many people can't keep track of where the line is. The building department, I'm sure they're very careful these days, but in a year or two when things calm down, I know a permit expediter who says, oh, well, no, it's a great system at the building department. Well, he loves it because he can go in with his friends that I'm sure he gives presents to or did. So is there corruption? Yeah. It's a question of how much do San Franciscans like it? And since I've lived my whole life here so far, I don't know what it is like in other places, but we all like our friends in government, right? Where's the line? What is corruption? But at this time, you bought your job, you got extra money, you were lightly supervised, if at all, across the country because that's the way policing evolved. It did very little supervision. So something got to be done. Ooh. Hopefully I'll get through the professional model. So we come to the professional model. We decided we're going to solve the corruption problems. So instead of having, police go check in somewhere and then go out, they're going to make a hall of justice. And we're going to make a place where we've centralized everything. There's command people, there's control, there's supervision. We took them off the footbeats. When I say we, our predecessors who were the citizens and voters and across the country. This whole thing is happening across the country at the same time. In the 20s, then we get into prohibition though. When did prohibition start? Like 1920, 20 to 33. So this is also in the middle of prohibition. So motorized patrols, get them out of the neighborhoods, get them into cars so they're not contacting people. And, you'll see the point of this in a second. Bureaucracy, keep track of what they're doing, count the number of tickets. Did they make a report? How much ground did they cover? As a young officer, I like throwing in these anecdotes about the police department, which I loved, but every time you reported off, you would step up to the lieutenant and you'd salute and you'd say, Corriea, Radio 12, reporting off. And he'd go straight home. That was the response, and off you go. And that was this old system of supervision of how you tracked what police officers did, right? Well, he also then wanted to know how many tickets I had given out, how many reports, and how many arrests, and how many felonies, and how many misdemeanors of that. That's that oversight, this management by objective. And then the captain would announce that he'd want more tickets. So the lieutenant would say, more tickets. So then we would, to do more and to not just arrive back at the station at the end of the watch and go, see you later, off you go. So that's that's what I mean about bureaucratic efficiency. Technology, the notion of fingerprinting was coming into the main, and to focus on that sort of stuff, to have radio dispatching. San Francisco still calls its police cars radio cars, because I guess at one time, I know at one time, they didn't have radios. So you see how the culture evolves and where this stuff comes from? To your question, I want to back up. I was 34 years in the San Francisco Police Department, and I saw a lot of things that we would say maybe not the most proactive officer, maybe not the best civil servant, but I never saw a case of somebody being paid off. I ran internal affairs for 3 years. I had my suspicions occasionally, but it was more character-related stuff. And organized crime, I'll come back to it, never got a real toehold in San Francisco because apparently we had a better system of organized crime here. We chased them back to New York. I focus on crime fighting. The notion of crime fighting was not in the main in earlier, I said they dealt with social unrest. They dealt with, warrants and things like that, but not crime fighters. So this is new. So in our modern, professional model, we decide that crime fighting is the focus. Peel said that crime fighting is not the measure of a successful police department. He said in 1829, it's the absence of crime that we should use to assess the effectiveness of our police agencies, not the fighting of crime or investigating crime after it happened. So you see to this day, there'll be a thing on television and they'll show a bunch of guns that were taken or a bunch of dope and money. And Peel would say, that shouldn't be there in the first place. The measure should be lack of crime, not what you do about it when it happens. And selection standards, they started actually having a civil service and classifications as a way to get the politicians out of selecting who the new police officers would be. I'm told that in some cities in this country, when new politicians would come in, whole police departments' leadership would change. All the bosses would go because the new politician had his people he was bringing in. We're going to go on a break in 5 minutes. This seems like a pretty good approach, get a little control, oversight, standards, civil service classifications. Couple problems. One, it took the police officers out of the community. And so all those things they were doing about social order, about poverty, about violence in the home, drunkenness. It was a time when if your husband was drunk 4 or 5 nights a week, which, wasn't uncommon, that actually, the women in this country got tired of the beer drinking husbands, which led to prohibition, right? Well, the cops at that time was aware who had the drinking problems and would bring them home. Have you ever heard the stories about, the police officer brought Joey home, right? No one's bringing anybody home anymore. And so we lost all of that as we solved the corruption problem. And we did do a lot at that time to solve the corruption problem. Training became important. We lessened the hold on politicians. We imposed a sort of military organizational structure. There was accountability. You could fire a police officer, but we removed them from the community. And so I'm going to say all the Wickersham work done in Washington, D.C., there were 2 commissions set up under Hoover. In New York, hold on one second. New York had its own. Where they found all the same problems that I've sort of discussed and changed and adopted this model. They started doing more take-ons of people, stop and frisk, stopping people on the street, that sort of stuff became more in the main. I'm trying to hold off because I want to get to the next one. But let me see. They couldn't get my. Let's see. So now I'm going to talk about what's going on television. What are we watching as we switch from the political patronage model? And I found some clips from that era, very few, that were unusable. They were offensive racially. It wouldn't make the point. But so you figure now 40s and 50s, we're starting to professionalize police work. And so whether the entertainment industry followed the changes here or led them in some ways, I'm not quite sure. But we started watching things. Let's see if I can get this to work. Shit. Hey, Herbert, can you come over, please? Let's see. Oh, never mind. 1951. So,
ladies and gentlemen, the story you are about to see is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
I'm just going to go quick to get it in before the break. Remember this one?
Whenever the laws of any state are broken, a duly authorized organization swings into action. It may be called the state police, state troopers, militia, the rangers, or the highway patrol. These are the stories of the men whose training, skill, and courage have.
And my personal favorite, this came later, but in the scenes that aren't in the police car here, is a station with a captain that's involved in everything, with a chalkboard on the wall, keeping track of who's doing what and how successful and how many people are working. It's all part of this professional model in policing. And they also had a Nipsey Russell, an African-American actor, was in the station. He never came out on the street with these guys, but he would keep track of things on the wall. Another thing is we move right in, we're getting very close to 1960. Anyway, I just like this.
There's a holdup in the Bronx, Brooklyn's broken out in fights. There's a traffic jam in Harlem that's backed up to Jackson Heights. There's a scout troop short a child, cruise ships do and idle wild.
Car 54, where are you? Well, in order to go on a break, what were the names of the officers?
Tootie and Muldoon.
Who said that? Okay. Tootie was the guy that's on the left, right? Tootie and Muldoon. What was his classic line that he used over and over again? You're going to remember it. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Ooh, ooh. That's all he said, So they were bumblers and it always worked out in the end. But it had all the attributes of the professional model of policing and the historical antecedents, where the culture from before that we try to do away with. When we're back from the break, I'll show you a couple of other examples of changes in the 60s that further implemented this professional model, and then what happened. Okay, 10 minutes.
You have coffee?
There's a holdup in the Bronx, Brooklyn's broken out.
As a senior, I've thought of this.
What percentage of the time am I actually staying in the zone you want me to be
No,
in?
you're good.
You sure?
Yeah, you just can't cross that way because then they don't see you. But
Okay.
You're doing great.
I called for help, but then I figured it out.
I know, I was like, oh, it's not playing, and I was just watching, and then you got it to play.
Yeah, thank you.
So you only have this part. Two more videos, right? I mean, 2 more slides with videos.
Yeah, a couple more. So this one and, but I figured it out. It works. Yeah.
They go, okay.
Go ahead. If I yell for you.
I'll spin around.
All right.
All right.
So I'm gonna go there.
It starts at 5.
No,
It ends at 5.
it was warm when I went in, but then I think we can see the cars coming. So I'll turn up the heater. I caught just a little bit here. I heard.
Thank you for everything, Carla, by the way. I mean that. Thanks. Sure.
Stop. It's that big room in the ferry.
No, this is right. Zohar. Hi.
Hi.
Do you know Sydney?
Hi. Hi, Cindy. Yes. Wow. Nice to meet you.
So I just wanted to introduce. Sure, well. Good.
Yeah, I've seen your face.
Yeah, he's changing on that.
Yeah.
I was just. Excellent.
You like it?
You remember Tootie and Muldoon. That's pretty good.
Guy behind me.
Oh,
Personal stories. I love personal stories.
He has a lot.
Yeah, that, I'm sure.
of course. He was my lieutenant for many years. I still, from time to time, I still see him at different things.
We, I'm a doc at UCSF and we did a big conference here, an AIDS conference in 1990.
Uh-huh.
You know, with all sorts of political.
Goes back.
And he was like our main
That's right.
security guy in the police department.
Yeah.
He was a good guy.
You know, Jack was, people told me I'm the most liberal cop they've ever, encountered.
Yeah,
But in my time, Jack was the guy.
great.
He was very fair. He told me one time, he said, if you stick around long enough, you're going to be in a petting zoo. You're going to be so rare,
Yeah.
meaning that
Yeah,
all
yeah,
the
yeah.
changes that were going on. But he rolled with them in call. Every week, it's the same call. Under the patronage system, that would have been resolved quickly because the officers would have been part of the community, but they might have taken a bribe from the guy that wanted to park his van there. That was the downside. I think this one shows to me a little of the old and a little of the new.
Yes, the ransom demands have been received. The decision is in the hands of the family now. Look, the investigation is in progress. I cannot release that kind of information at this time.
Reporters, lousy bloodsuckers.
No, look, I really can't help you. I'm sorry, I can't release any information. You're welcome.
Some poor slob gets himself kidnapped and they gotta know all the gory details.
It's their job, Inspector, to inform the public.
What? So what? Big deal? Another kidnapping? Everybody's doing it today, Barney. It's big business.
Unfortunately, that's true.
Malcontents. It's what it is, Barney.
You're probably right.
Sure.
So the world changed and we needed a new way of doing policing. So we come into is there anybody here that hasn't heard of, let's see if this works. Community policing. The notion of this transition from the professional era to the community policing era, which have you all heard that? Anybody not heard the term community policing? Well, I'll tell you what it is in a second, but let me say that the unrest going on in communities, the old tactics, the focus on SWAT and things like that, those were all modeled out of this professional era of training, military-like structure. And then this was the turning point when they said the professional model wasn't going to go on any longer.
We turn now to look back at an historic protest in Birmingham, Alabama, 60 years ago today. Beginning May 2nd, 1963, thousands of children began a week-long series of protests against segregation in Birmingham. The campaign became known as the Children's Crusade. When the children took to the streets, the local head of the police, Bull Connor, used high-pressure fire hoses and dogs to attack the children, many of whom were arrested. Images of the police violence was broadcast around the world. One photograph captured the moment when a white police officer allowed a large German Shepherd dog to attack a young black boy. The Children's Crusade began at the 16th Street Baptist Church. 4 months after the protests began, the Ku Klux Klan bombed the church, killing 4 little girls. Addie May. We turn now.
These incidents led in Congress. Somewhere, someone said we need community policing. We need the best parts of the political era to bring it to make that the way that we police in the United States. So the federal government started spending a lot of money on this idea of community policing. This is a cute little kid, isn't it? This is my son, Jack. Isn't that a great look? That's my wife in the background right there. She's gonna wonder why I chopped her head off, but anyway, so what's community policing? What it means is it's focused, it comes out of a number, some academic work, the broken windows theory. Some of you have heard of that, that if you deal with little community problems and the broken windows, the fare jumpers in New York, that if you take care of the little things, the big things don't happen. Well, there's some evidence that that isn't true. I'm still a big believer in this notion of you have to deal with what are the issues in the community, and the officers have to be able to connect with people in the community. Basically, take the professional model and put the community back into it, and also to empower the community. My command college paper thesis was on the title of it, and I'd like to think I was ahead of my time, but it said that the title was "The Demise of Community Policing for Want of Full Implementation," because everybody uses the term community policing, and we don't budget for it. We don't have the staffing to do it nationally. The practices are largely now just not practices anymore, but terms used in political discussions, and they're aspirational. But there's some, Herbert, I got to go off stage for a second. Oh, no, I can do it here. There's a thing called it's POP, problem-oriented policing. So you don't just look for crime, you look for problems. You look for, merchants that are selling alcohol to underage kids. You're looking for code violations in construction. You're looking at abandoned buildings that people are living in. And I could go on, the list is, virtually endless, but it's focusing on the problem and then leveraging and the police working with community to solve these problems. And out of solving these problems, you end up with a safer community. Really, you got to believe me on this one. You also activate underactivated communities. If you have a place suffering from urban blight, people aren't going to go there. But if you can activate it and get people there who carry with them sort of the accepted norms that we live by, then more people come and the level of accepted behavior goes up. I've read study after study on this stuff. I really believe it. And there's some that don't. But I'm going to give you the high points. Problem-oriented policing. Then there's a thing called the crime triangle. So suspect, location, and victim. You can take any criminal problem, any crime problem, and under the community policing way of doing business and say, well, if we impact one of these elements, we can prevent crime. If, let's say, we can inform victims to be careful of date rape drugs and don't let anybody serve you a beer that's been open already. I hate hypotheticals on the fly or examples, or if we identify crime hotspots to people and tell them what they can do to avoid that becoming a victim. On a location, we might be able to say, okay, security cameras, more security, fences, lighting, a thing called crime prevention by SEPTED, by design, basically, but it's a feature where actual, architects and design folks will design facilities to be safer. You won't know what I mean by me describing it, but sometime walk somewhere where physically you don't feel safe. Maybe it's a long corridor that's dark and something like that. You can design those things out. So in community policing, if you can impact one part of this crime triangle in partnership with the community, with business, with government, so you can prevent crime. Back to what Peel wanted to do. All's great. and I'm going to move enough to cover this. It's great, except it was never implemented. Really implemented in a heartfelt way. The government has the Office of Criminal Justice, or the Justice Department has the Office of Community-Oriented Policing. I get things daily offering grants, money being spent on community policing efforts, and but departments they'll all say across this country, yes, we're a community a community policing agency, and it is a fiction. I'm sorry, and anybody watching this might want to say, you know, what's the context? I could go on and on about why it's a fiction. I think it's a great idea, but even when it started to be implemented in the early 80s, the first thing they did is made specialized community-oriented policing officers. And then we tried making everybody a community-oriented policing officer. But at the same time, they're still going to 911 calls, and they have different days off, and they don't the system isn't set up to be in contact with, you know, your community leaders on your day off, or if you live in Vacaville, you know, you're not coming in to have a community meeting. It's not supported financially, it's not supported organizationally. And so this thing that replaced the professional model, some places implemented parts of it. They have, like in San Francisco, we have police community advisory boards. So every station has a group of people that come in and work with the local captain and talk with them. I had a police community advisory board. The utility of those boards is an open question. I think they exist because it's a good idea to have them. I don't know that they're that effective, in my opinion. By the way, I'm glad to bring in some current police high-level folks to talk to you, particularly on technology and a couple of other things. And they love to come in and talk to friendly crowds. So I'll find a few speakers. You won't be listening to me the whole time. And when one of them comes in for an hour, well, that's the whole class, basically. Yes.
Ask, why don't they do any more police walking the beat?
Well, that would be part of this.
Part of it, yeah.
Beats are really a staffing question. So I'll cover staffing later, but let's just take an example. Right now at Richmond Station, I'm going to say there are 70 officers available for patrol. Wow. So you have 70, but one half are off at any given time. So you only have 35. And then you're doing 80% staffing because these are half off on their regular days off. Half your personnel complement is off at any given time. So you have 35. So we'll take another 7 off of that for vacations and training. So now you're down to 28. Then you're going to have a call off or two. Someone's going to call in sick. You don't want to go below 80%. But I'm going to say, I'll bet you they have 25 officers available on any given day for patrol in the Richmond district. But they have to cover 5 shifts. So imagine how thin that peanut butter is when you smear it around 24 hours, you know? So on the midnight watch here, I'll bet you that you don't have more than 4 officers for the entire half of the western part of the city. So to answer your question of why there aren't any beat officers, they don't have the staffing for it. What? Well, we'll get to that in a later class. But so community policing disappears. I have 4 minutes to finish up here, and I'm going to do it. Well, you know what happened also? In the midst of all our hopes about community policing and struggling with the expenses of it and whether it's real or not, we get the 911 attacks. And that changed everything. And I'll tell you why. The federal government, in standing up the Department of Homeland Security, started offering a lot of grants to police agencies around the country. I was a benefactor of some of those grants. They would send you to Homeland Security training. A friend of mine, a retired lieutenant, he got a master's degree in Homeland Security paid for by the federal government. And then the equipment, the focus became terrorism, collecting information, and militarization of policing. So this is completely inconsistent with community policing. We just morphed into this after the 9/11 attacks. And the federal funding for equipment and training, it was unbelievable the amount of equipment that was rolled out. There's a Bay Area County group called OWASI that handles huge grant, or handled, I don't know if they're still doing it, handled huge grant money from the federal government to buy things, buy tanks. If the government didn't have a spare tank to give you, San Francisco got helicopters that we crashed. We crashed one. We've had two helicopters in the whole time that I've been around the police department, and we crashed them both. But it's very sad. But it's about, you can take a helicopter from the government, but you better fund the training and staffing and maintenance and all of that, or it's going to crash. And I used to go flying around with it to gas up in the East Bay. I had more friends tell me, get out of it, I'm coming over to pick you up, but mainly because you can take this equipment. These things are given out all over the country. So we now have departed financially from federal support, training, and focus. We're staffing up our special SWAT units and that sort of stuff, all post 9/11. So we still talk about community policing, but this has nothing to do with community policing. So
Jan Crawford is in Washington, where Congress may change the Pentagon's war surplus program. Jan, this is a big story. Good morning.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is. Good morning. I mean, a Georgia congressman has just introduced federal legislation that would limit the military equipment that goes to local police, saying tanks and M16s just don't belong on the streets of America. But law enforcement officials tell us that surplus equipment also can help them, especially as criminals are using deadlier weapons.
For several nights this week, this was Ferguson, Missouri. Tanks, combat gear, assault rifles. It looked like a military operation.
You must disperse immediately.
And that's because police departments in the St. Louis area, like those across the country, are arming their officers with equipment once on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. Much of it is free of charge or bought with federal grant money authorized by Congress. In the past year, the Department of Defense has given local law enforcement over 600 MRAPs, the armored vehicles designed to withstand roadside bombs. Texas alone received 68, Florida 45. The Warren County Sheriff's Department in upstate New York also got one. Bud York is sheriff.
I'm hoping I never have to use this vehicle, but if I do have to use it, I'm not going to have to worry about my people or possibly the public being injured, because it certainly can save them.
The Pentagon program has given departments over $5 billion worth of surplus equipment since the program launched in 1991. Helicopters, firearms,
So I've talked about community policing, being partners with the community, such. Where does this fit? This is what happens with the tanks. Remember I said community policing is about leveraging your relationships with the community to solve problems, to take government resources and work with the private sector and people. And what we see in Ferguson is, and I pick Ferguson because it's emblematic of it, not that there's anything particularly wrong with them that isn't a problem in other places, but their relationship with their community became on one side of a tank. And that's not problem solving. And I know there were riots there and everything, but then you have to question, what was the culture in that department that existed before those riots? If so you see my point about, and I have one more little thing.
Jan Crawford is in Washington, where Congress.
What do you call those tanks?
What?
What is the name of those tanks? Are they all different tanks because they're from Iraq?
No, I'm gonna find out. I've been in one. I've seen them, and I don't know what they're called. It could be called a bearcat, but I'm not sure.
Texas has 68 of those and Florida has 48. 45?
Yeah, I'll put the whole PowerPoint up on the,
See it January 6th, Tiffany.
so, no, so you've seen all the little shows. Where does this fit?
Oh my God.
Excuse me, but you do not own me.
You like that? All right.
So, this is the Dragnet and Car 54, Where Are You, of our time. I can tell you this, that the question is that I'd end on today is what's next? What's the next way we're going to police in this country? And are we going to get there by fighting with one another about funding or defunding police, about, you know, we're going to see where legitimacy of police action and trust. I look at videos like this all the time and dissect them for attorneys. What I saw here, I could tell you, I could go on at length about this death of George Floyd and how so many ways this intersection where this happened, the intersection of police officers, of systemic, intractable inner city problems, of criminality, low-end criminality, how at that intersection, we shouldn't be surprised at these outcomes. They're almost predictable. And so it's such an opportunity to say what comes next. And when you all leave here, you're going to decide what's next. Well, I'll tell you something, that the day that I saw this, within a week, I had looked at a cop's video and they had a vignette of someone having their knee on someone's neck. And when I went back to capture it a few days later, they had taken it down. It was gone. But here I'm going to say, if you dismantle this whole thing, you're going to see tunnel vision on the part of the officers, which is a part of stress. They have a crowd yelling at them. You're going to see poor training. You're going to see some waistbands that maybe are a little bigger than they were 20 years earlier, so that they're not as strong as they used to be. My experience in investigation tells me that if you're not as strong and well-trained as usually are, sometimes they go heavier handed to make it end quicker. There's a lot of ways to analyze these things. For me, it's the policy questions of where we're going next. And so we start out with Robert Peel and all these great ideas about policing, and we pass through the political patronage era. We come to the professional model meant to solve all those problems. Thank you. Community policing as a response to the failings of the professional model. And then we have the 911 attacks and we end up with tanks. And now we have really a crisis about what's policing going to look like tomorrow. And that's all I have for today. And I'm 5 minutes over. Sure. I'm sorry, you have a question?
Policing in smaller communities, like smaller towns as compared to New York City, San Francisco, maybe LA or Florida.
The one thing I've noticed is that you have poorer selection and vetting in small towns and less training because often they have less money. So that's what what has struck me. I suspect that there are smaller communities, or maybe there's closer relationships between the police and the communities they serve. But you also get situations where Joe's cousin wants to be a cop, so we might as well bring him on. And some of the awful things we see on television come out of selection and vetting, training, and of officers. And also then how do we finance the departments? We ask them to do hard work, and oftentimes they don't have the money to field the people that are the right people and well-trained to do this kind of work. So I think that there's some problems in small agencies, but there's some good things too. And I love being a San Francisco cop. If I could start over again, I would. I have no regrets. Okay, thank you.
Okay, if you decide to sign up, you could check, tell me how.
Sure. I will.
Thank you. Thank you.